For somebody who has maybe been trying a lot of different diets over the years, maybe even had some success in short bursts here and there, but they're feeling stuck. Their weight's just not coming off. They're saying, this might just be the way I am. What would you say to them?
Uh, it's a tough one because a lot of us feel that way actually. And the thing is that it wasn't always like that. If you look at sort of the population in the 1970s, for example, there was just a lot less. And I don't think it's because people have less willpower or anything like that. It was just that there was a number of sort of fundamental differences in the way we eat, in the way we approach eating, and so on. And therefore, we have to get back to it. So if you don't acknowledge that, if you simply say, oh, it's all about calories and it's all about willpower and all about this stuff, you sort of miss a lot of the nuances of the way that we eat, the way we think about eating, that led us to a lot of success. And that's why I sort of emphasize a lot of stuff about, understanding what causes weight gain. Because we think it's as simple as calories in, calories out, but it's actually much, much more complicated than that. And that's sort of what leads you to understanding sort of how foods interact. So I'll give you an example, for example. So for the last 30 years, we talk about calories, calories, calories. That's practically the only thing you hear about in terms of, the scientific and the expert opinions. It's all about calories, with the idea that 100 calories of cookies is as fattening as 100 calories of broccoli. And it's actually a ridiculous statement, because the minute you put the calories of cookies in your mouth, your body reacts to those cookies much, much differently than if you're to put the broccoli in your mouth. And we can measure those differences very easily. So insulin goes, up in one case, it doesn't in the other one. With broccoli, you might activate stretch receptors in the stomach. So you have different signals in your body. And those different signals in your body are going to make a difference, because that's what tells your body whether you use those calories and store them as fat, or whether you simply burn those calories as energy. So your body can do different things with the same amount of calories. So we keep pretending it's all about the amount of calories is the only thing that's important. And we sort of simplify it down to the point that it actually is nonsensical. And that's where people go wrong, because they say, well, if it's all about calories, well, I'll just eat ice cream for dinner and I should be fine. But you're not fine, because the hormonal response to those calories is so poor in terms of trying to lose weight that you just don't lose weight, because all those calories go into fat, for example, directly. And you don't have any calories for energy. So understanding that sort of what causes weight gain, the hormonal responses to food, the hormonal responses to the importance of the hormones to body fat percentage is sort of key, because we're sort of combating a lot of this ingrained attitudes about calories that was largely incorrect and scientifically completely way off. Like, it doesn't make any sense. All these people say it's all about calories, all about calories. It's like, it's actually not. There's actually so many different pathways that we've worked out over the last 5 decades.
Well, I want to stick on this train of thought for quite some time and get into the nuances here. And starting with, let's talk about the history here, because this is what people are talking about when you go see your doctor and you're looking to lose weight, or even a dietitian. This is the common knowledge that people are spreading and trying on for size. Why is this the knowledge that is being taught in schools then passed down?
Yeah, it gets back to the sort of 1970s, the dietary guidelines. So we'll start with calories. I do cover this in some of my lectures on YouTube and stuff. One of them is called The Obesity Epidemic Explained, which sort of goes a little bit into this. But let's start with the calories. The whole idea is that your body doesn't just take the number of calories, subtract the number of calories, a certain set number of calories, and then dump the rest in fat. That's not how the human body works. The human body works On hormones, that is, there are hormones that tell us to gain body fat, and there's hormones that tell us to lose body fat, okay? And there's hormones that tell us to be hungry, and there's hormones that tell us to be full and stop eating, for example. So when you take a certain number of calories of food, you're not only getting the energy contained within that food, that is the calories, you're getting the information of what to do with those calories. So on in if you take 100 calories, your body has sort of two choices. It can store it as fat, or it can burn it for energy, right? And which one it does is different than the total number of calories. It's a totally different, it's a totally different problem. So, if you look at the hormones, for example, like insulin, insulin is a hormone that is very important in metabolism, and it basically tells your body to store body fat. It's not a bad thing. That's just its job. Like, you need a hormone to tell you to store body fat, and insulin is one of those hormones. So when you eat, insulin goes up, you store body fat. You store some of that calories as energy, right? Body fat is one of the ways, sugar is another one of the ways that it stores energy, calories. When your insulin starts to fall, then that is the signal that you need to pull some of that stored calories back out. So it's a cycle, right? So when you eat, your insulin goes up, you store body fat. When you don't eat, insulin goes down, you pull out body fat. And it's as long as you keep those two in balance, you don't gain body fat. And you have to have this, otherwise you die in your sleep every single night, or you need to keep eating constantly because you have no source of energy. So you store it away. It's no different than getting food at the supermarket and you put it in the fridge so you don't have to go to the supermarket for every single meal. It's the same idea, right? It's not that complicated. But the point is that if you have certain foods, especially highly processed carbohydrates are probably the biggest problem. If you have certain foods that tell you that spike insulin way up, like cookies, for example, it's going to spike your insulin way up. Well, now you get from that food, 100 calories of cookies, you get the energy, the 100 calories, but you also get the instructions, which is insulin goes way up. You take that 100 calories and your body is going to shove that directly into your body fat stores. Why? Because you told it to. If you take 100 calories of broccoli, you get that same 100 calories of energy, but you don't get that instructions to immediately shove that into body fat. So your body is going to process it, get the minerals out, get the vitamins out, and then use it as for energy, right? So there's two different situations for that same 100 calories. If you take that 100 calories of the cookies and it's immediately stored, you have no energy. So so why did we believe this? Well, we always knew this, right? The only, the practical implication of this is simply that some foods are more fattening than other foods. Cookies are more fattening than broccoli. That's the only implication, which is pure common sense. However, in the 1970s, we went to a low-fat diet, right? So you have to understand that there was this huge epidemic of heart disease. In the 50s, 40s, and 50s, people were dying of heart attacks, and nobody knew why. So if you look back, of course, it's pretty obvious why it was. If you look at the rate of tobacco smoke, it was way up in the 40s and 50s. So it had been going up constantly since the 1900s, sort of peaked in the 50s. In the 50s, people were getting their heart attacks because people were smoking. But remember, the tobacco company was busy telling people that tobacco didn't cause any heart problems, didn't cause lung cancer, didn't cause heart attacks. So very few people believed that smoking was the problem. But of course, there was a very strong correlation between the rise in smoking and then 20 years later, the rise in heart attacks, as opposed to dietary fat, which of course was completely flat through that entire time. People didn't change their diet particularly in North America. So they were eating roughly the same as they ever ate. But when they went around and looked for, why are we getting so many heart attacks? Somebody said, it's the dietary fat. It didn't make any sense, because if you're eating the same percentage of fat in 1900 as you did in 1950, why would you have more heart attacks? Because you haven't changed the amount of fat that you're eating. So it didn't make any sense. But nevertheless, it sort of gained a lot of traction. So the problem with that, of course, is that if you eat a lot, if you try and reduce your dietary fat to very low levels, which was what happened in the 70s and 80s, you have to cut something else. So you can cut the things such as proteins, but proteins you need, or you wind up eating a lot more carbohydrates. So we wound up eating a lot more carbohydrates, and we weren't eating more broccoli. We were eating more white bread and stuff because it was a lot cheaper to buy that. So we switched over to this sort of high carbohydrate and mostly highly refined carbohydrates and low fat diet. And then we started to see a ton of obesity, and people started to say, why? Why are we getting this obesity? The obvious reason, of course, is that you've changed your diet. You went to processed foods and highly refined carbohydrates. But they didn't want to say that because they're saying, you couldn't be good and bad at the same time, right? A high carb diet can't be good in that it reduces heart disease, and bad because it causes obesity, right? Because we know obesity and heart disease are linked. So then the blame went from sort of, well, we should eat less starchy foods, less sugary foods, to, well, it's all about the calories, right? So what they said was, of course, fat is more denser in calories, 9 calories per gram versus carbohydrates and proteins, and therefore you have a lot, it's all about calories. And that's sort of where it started. We had to sort of shoehorn how eating a low fat diet was good for you, both in terms of the heart as well as, we had to sort of fit that in. And the calories model sort of made everything sort of fit together nicely, even though it was completely wrong. Like, there was no reason to think that 100 calories is equal in any way, right? And then that's how you got all these things like a calorie is a calorie and stuff like that, right? And it's like, well, we never said a calorie wasn't a calorie. What we're saying is that calories are not equally fattening, right? Calories from cookies are more fattening than calories from broccoli, because the broccoli is going to set off all these other hormonal effects, like filling you up and filling up your stomach and all this sort of stuff that's going to keep you slim. So that's where that whole calories obsession was. It stemmed from this sort of low fat. Of course, the whole idea of eating super low fat has been completely thrown out the window in the last little bit. Of course, it just hasn't panned out at all, right? So in the 80s and 90s, we went super low fat, didn't really have any impact on heart disease. Then, of course, we figured out that, hey, nuts were pretty good for you. Olive oil, fatty fish, omega-3s, all that kind of stuff was actually quite healthy. So then you had this whole healthy fat, and then now there's this whole, now they've even, stuff like butter and stuff. It's just not that considered that bad from a heart standpoint. So that's where the sort of obsession with calories came from. It came from this sort of misguided notion of fat must be, we said fat is bad. So we said fat must be bad for everything. And therefore it's not about the hormones that are causing body fat gain. It's actually the calories, even though it makes no physiologic sense whatsoever.
Well, what's so mind blowing about this is the fact that there is so much good science out there showing that this calories in, calories out model is broken. And we're in an obesity epidemic right now. Like, things just aren't working. So I'm just confused why it takes, a nephrologist and there's good reason you found your way to fasting and what we're going to get into, solutions to these weight gain problems and obesity. But like, why does the information take so long to get to dietitians, to get to doctors, so people can start getting better?
I think it's because when you have a certain paradigm, which is calories, it's all about the number of calories, right? So what the people are saying, and this is called carbohydrate insulin model, is that it's not just about number of calories, right? It's about the hormonal response to those calories, because our body runs on hormones. So the hormones that you set off with the foods that you eat make a difference to what your body does. So it's sort of a it's both number and also hormonal response. Whereas the prevailing sort of paradigm is sort of, it's purely about the numbers, and they're so adamant about it, right? A calorie is a calorie, a calorie is a calorie. It was like a mantra, right? So you had the entire world saying that calories are calories, so and therefore what they did was they transformed weight gain and weight loss from this sort of, hey, what are we doing wrong in terms of our diet, to it's all your fault because you didn't get your calories strictly enough or you didn't exercise enough. And it was very convenient for all the academics and stuff to simply blame the people, right? So remember that if you have a population which is gaining a lot of weight, like North America, right? The obesity percentage of obese people just went skyrocketed up, right? So it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be the advice that was given is bad, or the people. The advice is good and the people are bad, right? So if you're the one giving the advice, right? So the academics, the universities, all these researchers, what do you think you're going to choose? That the advice is bad or the people are bad? So of course they just double down on my advice is good. The people are stupid. The people have no willpower. Like, the people are the same people. People are people. They're just the same as the 70s. We're not better or worse than anybody else. The lack of it's not a lack of willpower that's driving the obesity epidemic. It's the choices we made because if you have bad information, bad advice, and you make a bad choice, and you say, I can eat cookies because it's only 50 calories, and I'll just eat a little less broccoli. And these were the choices that people were making. Like, I can just eat a little less broccoli and eat a cookie. Hey, that sounds pretty good. And it's perfectly scientifically flat. Like, I'm going to be the same. It's like, no, you're not going to be the same, right? So if you believed the carbohydrate insulin model, then you'd say, no, you can't substitute 50 calories of broccoli for 50 calories of cookies. You're going to be much worse off. But the calories people said, yeah, you could. So people did that, of course. They're like, yeah, I won't eat my vegetables and I'll have that brownie. Hey, I'm all good. But they weren't good, right? Because it was never true. It wasn't just the number of calories. It was two things. And of course, that's why it took so long, because nobody wanted to say that their advice was bad. And you can come up with an analogy. Like, for example, suppose you have a classroom and you have one child who fails, right? That might be the child's fault. But what if you have 70 children who fail? Is it that the child's fault, or is it the teacher's fault? Right? So now we have a situation in the United States where you have 70% of adults being obese or overweight. Are you going to say it's the people's fault or the teacher's fault? Right? Because I think it's much more likely that it's the dietary advice that we've been giving. And I would tend not to blame the people. I would blame the advice that was given, the research that's being given out, what's being taught. And it's not the dietitian's fault. The dietitians go according to whatever the sort of leading science says, right? Because science is largely made up, right? They made up that it's a calorie, right? And they just perpetuated that. But that's sort of where it comes from. And that's why it takes so long. I mean, in science, look at the low fat thing, right? So we switched from butter to margarine for, 20 years, right? Through the 70s, remember Basal and all this stuff. You should not eat butter because of the saturated fat and eat margarine instead. So there's this huge shift away for about 20 years from butter to margarine. Turns out the margarine had all those trans fats that were actually causing heart disease, and the butter actually wasn't that bad for you. So that took 20 years to figure that out. And it's the same with calories, right? It's the same thing. And the funny part about this whole calories thing is that there's been so many studies, scientific studies, looking at calorie restricted diets. In fact, there is not even a single study that can prove, after 50 years of research, that eating a low calorie diet, like ignoring the foods, like the type of foods, and just looking at the number of calories, if you simply cut the number of calories, there's no evidence There's no study that has ever been done that shows that it causes weight loss. So people say, "Oh, it's scientific. It's scientific." It's like it's not scientific. It's actually there's not a single study that can prove. And look at the practical evidence. Like, okay, so if there's no study that shows it, what's the sort of experience of the people? Well, in fact, probably 98% of people have done a calorie restricted diet, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. When you make those substitutions based purely on the number of calories, it simply doesn't work for you. So that's why it takes so long, because any change to the prevailing sort of accepted wisdom just takes a lot longer than you would think. Even when in hindsight it looks super obvious, like, hey, avocados weren't that bad for you, olive oil wasn't that bad for you, fatty fish like salmon weren't that bad for you. It just takes a long time because the people who are in charge would rather blame somebody else for the failings rather than their own advice. So then it just stays for like decades and decades. And it's the same thing for the calories. You see all this people out there who, the minute you say that there's something more to it than the number of calories, you get this huge backlash from researchers, professors, all these stuff who had built their career on it's just the number of calories.
Let's stick on this calories thing a bit longer here and talk about the physiology. If somebody, say they're even on a healthy diet and they're eating, vegetables and good quality meats, but they decide to cut out, say, 300 calories a day, let's talk about how they're doomed no matter what and what the physiology does to compensate as they cut out those calories.
Yeah, and this is what we know for forever, right? So what happens is that people who talk about it's all about calories, they throw out this thing which they often say, "Oh, it's just the thermodynamics." Right? And it's funny how calorie people always talk about thermodynamics, but thermodynamics people never talk about calories. And they have this thing called the energy balance equation, which is fat gain or fat loss, sort of body fat equals calories in minus calories out. And that's true that's always true because it's really body fat is a storage, like it's a way to store calories, right? So calories in minus calories out. Just like if you have a box, right? The amount you put in minus the amount you put out is the change, right? It's no different than that. So body fat is just a way to store calories. So therefore, body fat equals calories in minus calories out, and that's fine. That's always true. However, what they do then is they take the additional step and say, therefore, if you simply reduce your calories in, you'll reduce your body fat. And that's not true. Because remember, there are three variables here. There's body fat, calories in, and calories out. When you reduce one variable, which is the calories in, there's two other possibilities. Either your body fat goes down, which is good, or your calories out, which is your metabolic rate goes down, right? Which is bad. But you can do one of those two things without breaking any laws of thermodynamics. If you look at the studies, so you reduce 300 calories, 500 calories a day, you can either lose 500 calories of body fat, or you can reduce your metabolic rate by 500 calories. Those are the two and your body fat remains the same. Those are your two possibilities. Which one happens? Well, every single study from like the last 30 years, and there's been a lot of studies and there's been meta-analysis, and every single one shows you that when if you don't pay attention to the information, which is the types of foods that you're eating, if you simply just reduce calories, then what happens is that the metabolic rate goes down to compensate. So you eat 500 fewer calories, you burn 500 fewer calories because your metabolic rate goes down, and body fat stays the same. That's why you don't lose weight. But there's no breaking of any laws of thermodynamics or anything. So if you want to do that, if you want to simply lower your metabolic rate, then lowering your calorie intake is a great way to do that. But most of us don't want to do that. Most of us want to change the body fat percentage. And think of it this way. A lot of people are eating a lot of high calorie foods, right? So if you are taking 2,000 calories in, Normally you're burning 2000 calories and your body fat is stable. If you go from 2000 calories to 1500 calories, well, then your body simply burns 1500 calories and your body fat remains stable. Well, that's a perfectly scientifically valid, way of solving for those three variables, right? It's a balance equation. There's three variables, without causing any problems. And it all comes down to the fact that, hey, if you have 1500 calories coming in and you want 2000 calories to go out, well, then you need to make sure that the calories can come out of the body fat, right? Because that's your storage, right? So if you want stuff to come out of your storage compartment, you can't lock that box. Insulin, which is a hormone, it basically blocks you from taking calories out of body fat. That's its job. It's what it's supposed to do. So if you're eating foods, or if you're eating in a way, and this is like eating constantly is one way to keep your insulin levels high. If you're keeping your insulin levels high, you actually cannot access that body fat stores. So if your body fat percentage is locked while you reduce calories in, and body fat must stay stable because you haven't changed the hormones to let it change, then your only option, remember three variables, calories in, calories out, body fat. You lock body fat into a constant. You reduce calories in, your only option is to reduce calories out. So it's from a scientific mathematical standpoint, it's actually very, very obvious what needs to be done. You need to change the hormones, not the number of calories.
And we're going to get into all that and give people solutions here. But before we do, say somebody has gone by this calories in, calories out, and they've really been limiting their calories and having, minimal or no success. How long does it take for the physiology to reverse, or does it? Somebody might be saying, I've broken my physiology because I've been limiting calories for all these years doing these different diets. Does the body return to normal? And if so, how long does it take?
It actually only takes a few weeks. I mean, if you look at all the studies of metabolic rate, and this is the big thing that's important, is that people think that your metabolic rate is stable, right? If you burn 2000 calories a day, you always burn 2000 calories a day. That's not true. It is actually quite variable. It can go up or down. So if you reduce your calories, it's going to go, down. If it increase your calories, it tends to go up. The key is to how to keep that relatively stable while letting your body access the body fat. Because remember, the insulin is sort of the key to that, and you can start right away. But the thing is that your body fat as a store of calories, there's probably like 200,000 calories sitting there, right? So the key is, and say you take 2,000 in a day, and you have 200,000 sitting in body fat stores. The key is not the number of calories you're eating in that one day, right? Because you have 2,000 coming in, 2,000 going out, and 200,000 sitting in your body fat stores that you want to get rid of some of that. The key is not that few hundred calories you have coming in or going out. The key is how are you going to unlock all of that fat? So, the point is that your body sort of exists in one of two states, right? If your insulin is high, you're storing calories. If your insulin is low, you're burning calories, right? So you're either in the fed state, storing calories, insulin high, or you're in the fasted state, which is, you know, insulin low, burning calories, pulling those calories back out. So you're either fed state or fasted state, insulin high or insulin low. The key, if you're wanting to get rid of some of that body fat, is to make sure you're spending a good proportion of your time in the fasted state, because that is the only time that you're actually going to be able to pull the calories back out from body fat. It doesn't work otherwise. And we know this because if you simply give somebody insulin, if you simply inject insulin constantly into people, and they've done these studies, then what happens is that people gain weight because you've given the body the instructions to gain weight. You've said gain weight, gain weight, gain weight. If you then take that person with 2,000 calories eating and you reduce it to 1,500, right? So you think you're going to lose weight, but at the same time, you keep injecting insulin into these people. And again, this study has been done. So you take 2,000 calories in, you go down to 1,700, but you're injecting a ton of insulin. Well, what happens? You gain, over 6 months, people gain 20 pounds, even as they ate 300 calories a day less. How? The only way you can do that is to reduce your metabolic rate to like 1,400 calories a day, right? You reduce it lower such that your body continues to gain that body weight. Why? Because you gave your body the instructions to gain that body weight. So it all comes down to the sort of hormones, the insulin, and so on. And the question is, how are you going to do that? How are you going to affect those hormones? One is by the types of foods that you're eating. So remember, processed foods, especially processed carbohydrates, are probably the highest. So certain foods are going to be more fattening. Or two, affecting the amount of time that you spend eating in a day, right? That's the other way. So you have a longer period of fasting so that your insulin drops and you're pulling your body out, you're pulling those calories out.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
The thing about exercise is that it's extremely good for you, but the weight loss benefits are marginal. From a scientific mathematical standpoint,